Hello, everybody. Wild story I have to share with you today. Obviously, concerning censorship, which I'm really passionate about, being a longtime journalist. This cheering on of shutting up voices that should be relevant to all of these conversations. And this is quite a complicated tale, but we're going to talk about how even more than censorship, there are ways that even what we might think is good media, they can twist stories or only release a little bit of certain stories, so that we are still kept from the full truth. And so joining me today, I have Dr. Shiva Ayadure, and he is the inventor of email. He's an author. He is so many things, a podcaster. And so I want to dive in because there's so much to cover. So I'm going to bring him in right now. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Good. How are you, Christy?
Good. So I am broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. So I always wonder what's going to survive where. I was encouraged by when you did dive into some of these details on your own YouTube channel, that it's still up. So that was encouraging to me. But among the many contributions that you have made, you also ran for Senate in Massachusetts. And being that as it may, I saw this article from that was just released yesterday about the Massachusetts Department of Public Health secretly colluding with Google to auto install contact tracing spyware on your phone. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that's happened, Christy, is that the people who create technology have always had to have a sense of ethics about how that technology is going to be used. And what's happened is most of the people who are in technology creation at massive companies, many of those companies outsource stuff to places all the way around the world where they don't have the First Amendment. For example, to India or to places in Britain or to other countries in Philippines. If you look at many of these technology companies, and me being of Indian origin, but from a very different kind of Indian origin, which we can talk about, a lot of these companies, Google, Twitter, Facebook, have a lot of people from Indian origin working there. And many of them are so happy to come to America that they don't, frankly, even like the First Amendment. They're just so happy to be here and get a car and drive around that they're fine censoring people. Because, the British Commonwealth, many of the Commonwealth countries, in fact, Britain and UK, really don't like the First Amendment. That's why the United States was created, because we created the Bill of Rights, et cetera. So when you look at what's going on, given the tech companies have people who are actually manning tech companies who frankly don't care about the First Amendment, so it's very easy to manipulate people to tell them, to have them do what the government wants. And that's what this is about. Technology and the big tech companies, which is what we discovered in our very historic lawsuit, is essentially an arm of government right now. It's not the other way around. The media mistakenly, and even the people on the right, attack big tech or even the left. Big tech is basically a wing of the United States government, or for that matter, government. And that is what our lawsuit exposed. And we figured out all the infrastructure of how that was created. And that's what people need to start waking up to, is that we thought that the internet was going to liberate people. We would all build our own websites. We would all have sort of this egalitarian system. What's actually happened is consolidation took place. And that consolidation, private portals were built to the government, as our lawsuit discovered in 2020. So basically, government tells big tech what to do. And frankly, if you're like an Elon Musk and you get a lot of money from government, are you going to say no to them? Or
exactly.
So.
But so many of the topics that we are talking about are related in the sense that it all goes back to this desire for a certain group of people to control us. So whether it's tracking us through spyware on our phones or limiting what we can say through censorship, it all goes back to that. And one thing I do really appreciate about you, Dr. Ayadure, is that you say that we spend so much time saying right versus left, Republican versus Democrat, that we're ignoring the fact that it's us versus them, right?
Yeah, so one of the things that people need to recognize when you look at this as a system, and it's one of the areas that I've spent a lot of time on as a system scientist, is understanding these complex systems. And when you understand systems, you recognize intelligent systems have a goal. There's 9 principles of system. One of them is a goal. I think everyday people want truth, freedom, health is what, this movement that we've created, but those in power want power, profit, and control. So in order for them to achieve power, profit, and control, they have a very, very different set of criteria that they're driven by. And that criteria is basically to subjugate large masses of people and be able to observe them and then be able to control observability and controllability. So that's fundamentally where all of this is coming from, a notion for power, profit, and control. But as a very, very interesting activist, Malcolm X, said, it's not that we are outnumbered, it's that they're better organized. And they're better organized because they understand this feature of systems thinking. They know how systems work. And so a lot of my work over the last 2 years has been training a global community of people in systems thinking, which is what the elites learn at the major universities.
Wow. But before we get too deep into the major topic we're going to cover, and that the Intercept made it seem like they released this breaking news, and
So they
you're saying
plagiarized it. It's wholesale plagiarism.
yeah, and we're going to get into that, but I want to just
Yeah.
back up because I introduced you as the inventor of email, and I was talking with my daughter before, or just last night, about who I was going to be interviewing, and I kind of was able to use it as a lesson because I was able to bring up all these older articles, even from 2014, Yahoo News and other popular outlets, and they had no problem referring to you as the inventor of email in their headlines. And then I showed her that narrative shifted, and suddenly it was contested, and suddenly there was articles saying like how this man pretended to be the inventor of email. And I was explaining to her, isn't that interesting? It's because he started exposing some of the things that these folks do not want exposed. He was going against the narrative. And so then they decided to attack what he had done, what he had contributed. And so it was a good lesson regarding that. But it's also interesting that what gets buried oftentimes is that you actually were able to sue some of these people, particularly Gawker, for contesting that you were the inventor of email. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the invention of email did not occur by the military. It's one of these big lies that Americans have been brainwashed into thinking that you fund the military industrial academic complex and we should be so happy that we get Tang and Velcro, by the way, which didn't come out of the military either. The reality was that a 14-year-old boy, that was me, in Newark, New Jersey, before I went to MIT and got 4 degrees from there, all sorts of awards at MIT, created email in a small medical college to move women from the typewriter to the keyboard, which is a very liberating event for women because in those days, who used computers were old white guys with lab coats. And they thought women were far, less capable of doing what they could do. So I created email, which was the complete replication of not simply sending messages on electrical wires, electronic devices. That would go to Samuel Morse, the credit. I never claimed to be the inventor of electronic messaging. I created email, the system. The entire interoffice mail system was the inbox, the outbox, the drafts folder, CC, carbon copy, inbound, the attachments. It's a very complex system. That was all in paper-based form. Every organization in the world had that. And I was asked to convert that. As a precocious 14-year-old kid, I did that. I was working full-time at a medical college doing medical research. This was a side project I did, wrote 50,000 lines of code, worked my butt off, stayed awake until 2 a.m, and converted that entire system into the electronic form, which you see in every platform that you go into today. And I also named it email because the operating system only allowed 5 characters. And then third, when I came to MIT in September of 1981, the president of MIT had heard about my stuff, and he said, and he was on Reagan Science Council, and he said, it's too bad the Supreme Court is not recognizing software patents. You should apply for a copyright under the 1980 Copyright Act, which I did. And on August 30th, 1982, a 17-year-old kid at that time, an American kid, Indian-American kid, got issued the first United States copyright for email, recognizing me as the inventor of email. So I wrote all the code, named it email, and have it. And then never talked about it because we were taught to be humble Indians. And then in 2011, when my dear mom was dying, She'd presented me a suitcase with all this stuff 33 years later. The editor of Time magazine wrote an article. One of the few journalists who went through and he said the man who invented email. And then it went into the Smithsonian. And then it created, as you mentioned, any question on this when there's not even a gray area on this. And when it went into the Smithsonian, it was like a new skull was found in Africa. Because the military-industrial complex had chosen one of their own, and they had basically completely lied that they had invented email, because the military likes to take credit for everything when they frankly do very little innovation when you look at it. And Raytheon, the company, had branded the @ logo with some guy who looked like a nerd, and he had never done anything close to email. If anything, he did a caveman version of Reddit, you know? But I invented email, period. And as you say, when I started running for office, this becomes a question. But Gawker, the awful things, the racist things they said, blogs came out saying this Curry State Indian should be beaten and hanged.
Oh my gosh.
You can go look at what Gawker wrote. But fortunately, after 4 years, I was able to find an attorney who took it on contingency. We sued Gawker. We won close to $1 million. And Gawker was forced to take down those 3 defamatory articles. And on top of that, I was appointed the chairman of the bankruptcy council because we drove them into bankruptcy. And that's what organizations like. And then all the so-called people who claim they're for the First Amendment said I was attacking the First Amendment. Defamation and telling, false speech is not supported by the First Amendment. You have to own up to what you write. So there's 2 sides to the First Amendment. Yeah, you can speak what you want, but if you lie and you call people all sorts of names that are not true, you will be sued. And that's what we did. So, but the fact is, a 14-year-old Indian American kid, long before he came to MIT, in a small medical college in the center of the ghettos of Newark, New Jersey, is who invented email. And it was done for a civilian application, helping women. Women were my inspiration for doing that. It was not a bunch of old white guys working for the military. It's just the truth. So people really like to write histories, but it's a little bit hard on this one because typically with the Tesla Edison thing, I'm still alive. And, it took, by the way, a 14-year-old boy invented TV, Philo Farnsworth. And it took him 60 years to get the credit he deserved.
Wow.
RCA stole all of his inventions, started making TVs. He won in the 19th year of his lawsuit. There's only 1 year left. I believe he died an alcoholic. But the whole goal here is, Christy, is to always bring power back to the centers of power. When the truth is, all great things actually occur in the edges. Mm-hmm. Innovation occurs in the edges. Discovery occurs in the edges. Political movements occur in the edges. And they want to always devolve power back to the center. And this is the constant brainwashing. Always give credit back to the center. Well, it was, you talked about it. Just like the invention of email was us who discovered that censorship infrastructure. It wasn't the Intercept. It wasn't, Tucker Carlson who knew about it. Him and Glenn Greenwald actually concealed it. Anyone who gets mainstream establishment attention, they're part of the system.
Wow.
That's what people need to understand.
I think that's so important to hear that perspective, because there are people that we think that we can trust. And I mean, I think a lot of really great things come out from Glenn Greenwald and Tucker, but I'm always open to hear that there might be conflicts of interest or like you were terming it before, where we're only getting a little bit of the truth, but not all of it. But before we move on, I just want to remind the viewers, this is live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We are going to be talking about censorship, oddly enough. And so I just want to remind you, please, please, please check out my website, klim.news, Christy Lee Independent Media, klim.news. Also, my locals page, christyleetv.locals.com. Make sure you check out Dr. Shiva's website. What is your website again?
There's 2 websites people should go to. They can go to truthfreedomhealth.com, where they can really join the movement for truth, freedom, health. They can also go to winbackfreedom.com, where we have all the research, all the analysis we discovered from the Censorship Network. And if people want to learn more about the stuff I'm doing in terms of some new innovations, they can go to vashiva.com.
Awesome. So make sure you make note of that. I will release, like I usually do, an edited version where I will include some of the articles we reference and some of the visuals that we're about to reference. But be sure to check out those websites, Rumble, and all of those free speech friendly platforms. I'm on all of those things as well, but I like to try and reach you live while I can. So continue to share support and check out those other alternative websites where you can actually find it if for some reason this disappears later on. Just wanted to make that note before we dive in. But I even myself had covered the DHS leaks from the Intercept. It seemed to be they painted it as it was brand new information of the connections that they had made when it came to how much big tech and government were colluding in suppressing information and sharing information. But you are painting a much different story than that. So I just want to give you the floor.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, look, one of the things, Chrissy, that you'll hear is, well, the guy says some good stuff, Glenn Greenwald, whatever, et cetera. Or the issue is, one of the most important things that you learn to separate the wheat from the chaff is, do people say the right thing at the right time that can have impact in society? That's what's the most important thing is, do you reveal the truth at the right time? A crime is taking place and you witness it. You are aware of it. Do you talk about it right then when it can have an immense impact? Or do you wait a year later? Or it's like the firemen coming a year, after the building is burned down and saying, oh yeah, I'm here. Well, the building's burned down. I put Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson into that because one of the things we want to educate people on is beyond the issue of left and right, Christy, which serve each other and create a dialectic. There is a not so obvious establishment. The not so obvious establishment is created by the establishment in a recurrent process. And they essentially they appeal to people because they look like they're always saying the right things. Mm-hmm. And they may in fact say the right things, but you have to look at when did they say it? When did they say this? And there's a very famous engineer by the name of Alan MacDonald who talked about this. If you remember 1986 when the space shuttle blew up, I remember getting up and I saw icicles all on it. And I said, well, I hope they're not going to let it go. And anyway, at 11 a.m., it blows up on, I think, January 26, 1986. But anyway, the NASA was putting massive pressure on this guy called Alan MacDonald to sign off on the launch. And he said, I won't do it because these O-rings have never been tested. Anyway, he was vilified. He was attacked. Space shuttle did blow up. And then after it blew up, then all these guys came. Oh, yeah, we knew about this, da-da-da-da-da. And so he died about a year ago. And he said, one of the most important things in life is to say the right thing at the right time so you can have impact. Okay, so keep that in mind when you start giving undue credit or you pay obeisance to people who say stuff who have access to mass media. When did they say it? It's very important because they could actually be part of the crime. Okay. So in this case, I've been an activist in addition to being a scientist and a bunch of other things my whole life. In 2017, we first ran against Elizabeth Warren as independents. Then we decided to run as Republicans. The Republicans, obviously, in Massachusetts are one with the Democrats. They didn't want an outsider. You would think they would have embraced a guy who is really an epitome of the American dream, but they're not because they want their own people continuing. But anyway, we ran a heroic campaign, 3,000 volunteers on the ground, 25,000 lawn signs. We raised $2 million in a Republican primary for U.S. Senate. All right. The establishment Republicans run a fool who no one even knew about, maybe had one lawn sign up. Anyway, on election day, September 1st, 2020, the word on the street was Dr. Shiva won by a landslide. In the hand-counted county in Franklin County, where they count the ballots by hand, we win by 10 points. In every other county where they use machine, it's 60-40, 60-40, 60-40. I never thought election fraud took place in this country. I had to put my hat on as an engineer, as a scientist, started exploring these systems, found out that when the ballots go through machines, images are created, which are supposed to be preserved by a law called 52 USC 20701. The government of Massachusetts deleted those images when I asked for them. Mm-hmm. When I shared this on Twitter, I was thrown off. Never been thrown off Twitter in my, how many ever at that point, nearly 15 years or 13 years on Twitter. Mm-hmm. When I then filed my lawsuit against the government of Massachusetts. It was revealed in cross-examination. I represented myself. None of the lawyers wanted to take on the government. We did. And we found out that the government has a portal to Twitter. So that portal, they admitted, was used to take me off Twitter, which is the grossest violation of the First Amendment. The judge was upset. He demanded that they stop interfering in my election. I was in the middle of a U.S. Senate campaign. Mm-hmm. Think about this. Trump didn't do anything. None of these people, we didn't see them around when we were exposing this and we found out this infrastructure. Then on February 1st of 2021, when I was back on Twitter, I once again got deplatformed. Once again, when I shared the emails exposing that the government had deleted these ballot images, but this time permanently. But during that period, Christy, we had discovered, if you go to winbackfreedom.com, you'll see this whole diagram. We had figured out that they had created this entire infrastructure for government to silence speech, in fact, launder it to big tech companies through non-governmental agencies. In fact, the non-governmental group that was created that housed this clearance so the government could inform them was funded none other than by Pierre Omidyar, who's also the founder of the Intercept. So over here, a multi-billionaire who, by the way, is also into system science, thinks that only he and a few people should be controlling things. He creates technologies for watching people's emotions, those kind of things. But anyway, Omidyar has founded eBay. Omidyar, who bought PayPal from Elon Musk, also was instrumental in creating this domestic censorship infrastructure, which we put out there. It's been out there for 2 years. And we exposed all the details of this. We told Tucker Carlson about it in 2020 and 2021. All the emails are up there. Same with Glenn Greenwald, the supposed guy who's the big exposer. You know, everyone thinks he gets branded as this guy who does investigative journalism. Well, Glenn knew about all of this. Tucker knew about all of this. The ACLU knew about all this.
Yes, you do have, and again, he does have the copies of the emails sent. And did you even get a response? I saw the emails
but Tucker Carlson, look, all these guys read emails, okay? And maybe because Tucker Carlson has responded to me in the past, okay? The bottom line is they were made aware of it, fully made aware. And the more important thing is we don't need them, Christy, because we have a whole movement in our Truth, Freedom, and Health movement. 200 million people got it because I did video after video after video. It's everywhere. Okay. Hey,
I'm going to play the devil's advocate real quick because this stuff is extremely complicated. Not all of us are creating things like email at the age of 14. and so like even me trying to dig through it and really truly understand it is difficult. So just me being the devil's advocate, is there any chance that when they got these emails, they didn't fully grasp the implications or fully grasp what you were trying to say?
Yeah, they could say that if they were like a 2-year-old working at an elementary school, not if you say you're an investigative journalist like Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson always acting so interested, like he, puts on these little faces. He's an entertainer. Glenn Greenwald worked at the Intercept. Glenn Greenwald has made comments that, I don't want to release that yet because I want to keep some of the sensitive information for sensational purposes. We have to get our recognition that who said the thing at the right time, because we're brainwashed into always outsourcing our dignity and our respect to people who get on mainstream media. Look, I've been on mainstream media. I was on the front page of every major journal when I was at MIT inventing many things. But when I said email was invented before I came to MIT, that throws a wrench in their narrative. All right. So we have two worlds going on here. The worlds of the elites, where you have to bow down to them. And I've had many opportunities to do that. And I've walked away from it, coming from the best institutions in the world to be part of that. But I remember where I came from, Christy. I came from lower caste people in India and working class people in New Jersey. That's who I'm dedicated to. That's who I'm loyal to. Glenn Greenwald is about himself building his brand equity as a fighter, okay? But when he's what I call part of the pseudo refuseniks, all right? And Tucker Carlson falls right into that. Tulsi Gabbard is another one who they're modeling for that. Watch out for her. But this understanding that I'm sharing with you comes when you take a systems approach. When you look at the arc of human history, you find out that it has always been working people independently organizing, building mass movements that has always changed anything. It's never been from the Kennedys, never been from the likes of Glenn Greenwald or Tucker Carlson or top-down unions. It's always been bottoms-up movements. And the arc of human history has been whenever those movements have come up or outsiders come in, they have a very powerful force to make sure that the real leaders, the real heroes of people bottoms up are snuffed out, don't get that they're made invisible. It's a process of the immune system of the system that it has. But in this case, they have a serious problem because we got our stuff out to 200 million people. Gateway Pundit put it out. Is Glenn Greenwald not as good a Gateway Pundit? You know? So the real journalists get to be called conspiracy theorists, and those who don't do the work later on get to be called investigative journalists. So the bottom line is our stuff, which has been on winbackfreedom.com for nearly 2 years, was out there. People covered it. What I call the real investigative journalists covered it, not the mainstream journalists, not in fact the mainstream quote unquote investigative journalists who want to act like they're the ones who are breaking news. Anyway,
I want you to break down that term that you used again, where
limited hangout.
Yeah, break that down.
So what ended up happening was about 2 weeks ago, I'm at home and my assistant, John says, "Hey, Shiva, people are talking about this DHS leaks. It's your stuff." I go, "What are you talking about, John?" So I go up and I start looking at this, and it's literally, oh my God, government is controlling big tech. That was our whole lawsuit. It's out there. You can go look at the emails. Government is laundering censorship to Twitter. It's like that was the heart of the lawsuit. And so I look at this and I said, wow, this is quite fascinating. They're just talking about, and they come up with a branding, DHS leaks. DHS, when you look at the entire censorship architecture, it's just one part of it. You have CISA, you have Harvard, you have the Atlantic Council. All of these people are involved in architecting this infrastructure. And by the way, Pierre Omidyar, the Zuckerbergs, and the Murdochs are right there. So you're telling me that you are an investigative journalist, this guy Fang and Klippenstein, you don't know that the guy who founded the Intercept is the one who founded the Center for Internet Security, which is what houses ISAC, and you're talking about that? I don't think you're an investigative journalist. You're a flunky. So don't call yourself an investigative journalist breaking news. What you are doing is something much more deleterious. You're actually concealing Pierre Omidyar's involvement. So what am I talking about? When you look at what we revealed in 2020 in hard fought out lawsuits, where we expose that it is the government, CISA, which was created by Trump, signed into law, 70% of the people who created CISA were Republicans who so-called care for freedom. In fact, people like Elizabeth Warren, who I don't like at all, who I ran against her, she actually voted against the formation of CISA because she probably knows she didn't want that to come bite her if she says she's a constitutionalist, right? But anyway, CISA was created. Now, the government rightfully may want to protect American citizens and surveil and make sure we don't have foreign adversaries, right, attacking our security. However, the government has no right to surveil. That's only one part of it. This is bigger than what Snowden talked about, but censor U.S. citizens, censor a U.S. Senate candidate. This is a complete gross violation. Well, how did they do it? They created a buffer called non-governmental entities. So the government, if they want to take you out on Twitter or et cetera, they will contact this non-governmental entity called the Center for Internet Security, which has ISAC, which is like a call center, a nonprofit funded by Pierre Omidyar, who created the Intercept. That organization will then launder the censorship, and governments say, we didn't do it, they did it. But you know what? You created this, you weaponized this infrastructure. That is what we exposed over and over again. It was told to Tucker Carlson, it was told to Glenn Greenwald. But maybe Glenn Greenwald is afraid that we'll win a Pulitzer and he won't. Okay? Seriously, I have to question that because all eyeballs have to be on Glenn Greenwald or Tucker Carlson. So they knew about it. Okay? And if they didn't know about it, then don't say you're an investigative journalist. Because if you see something like that coming in your subject line, you're going to open it. And it's coming from an MIT PhD. And Noam Chomsky is the one who told me to reach out to Glenn. And Noam Chomsky is one of the most cited guys in science. And Glenn will bow down to Noam. And I've known Noam since 1986. So these guys can't say that unless they're completely reckless in their journalism. But what we exposed for 2 years was all of this. Other independent journalists took our stuff out. Other people like yourself, those are the real journalists. They did their job. So 200 million people saw all of our stuff, Christy. Now, when the DHS leaks comes out 2 weeks ago, in basic investigative journalism, there's a very high standard of ethics. against plagiarism. You're supposed to cite sources. You don't know how to Google. You do one Google on Pierre Omidyar, and you'll find out on Influence Watch, he's the one who created Center for Internet Security. You didn't know that? You don't know that Google, that your own organization, Intercept, was created by Pierre Omidyar, who funded it, was the founder. You didn't know that? So when I was looking at this, you see what happens is the hard work was done by us. And but this occurs in academia. People do the real research. They nerd away on it, do the work. They get it out there. And then what happens is the establishment has a very methodical process. Because in a democracy, people should be able to do research. So in order to conceal that, they have the fake democracy. And what they do is, first of all, they conceal it.
Okay, I want to take a break and recap because we have some new people joining us. And I also, you are so smart, Dr. Shiva. I want to always try and dumb everything down, as bad as that sounds. But I just want to make it super simple so people understand what we're talking about. So basically, many of you heard about the DHS leaks coming out from the Intercept, where they were exposing government and big tech collusion, and they had the receipts of this back channel of communication when it came to the things that we can and cannot talk about. And what Dr. Shiva is explaining right now are these things that they were supposedly exposing were known 2 years ago, and he's got the receipts of the emails of trying to reach out to some of those that are cheerleading this exposure now, but they weren't 2 years ago, and also explaining this concept of limited hangout, because he is able to expose that the Intercept, which is funded and founded by, say his name again?
Pierre Omidyar.
Pierre Omidyar. I massacred that, excuse me. But he is the one that actually created this system that made this possible. So that is my simple, stupid explanation. How did I do, Dr. Shiva?
Pretty good. Yeah. Can I share my screen here, Christy?
I think so. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think you just need to make this accessible. You see on the bottom,
Thank you.
So this is a censorship infrastructure that we expose. It's been on the website. It has all the players. And if you zoom in right here, you'll see Pierre Omidyar is right here. The founder of the Intercept is the one who created this entire infrastructure. And this infrastructure is, here's CISA. All of these people, to keep it simple, were involved in creating all of these manuals, which laid out the architecture. So government here, if I'm over here, wants to take me out, they would send it through the censorship infrastructure, okay? Well, the bottom line is Pierre Omidyar, who is part of that, is also the funder and the founder of the Intercept. So this is a clear diagram. So if you're over at the Intercept and you're doing an article on supposedly exposing, which is only one piece. DHS is only one piece right here, Christy, of this. There's all these other players. Well, you damn well did a great investigative journalist job because you left out the guy who helped fund this clearinghouse. Okay? So this is a simple diagram. This is for the simple takeaway. Pierre Omidyar, who helped fund and create the censorship infrastructure, which was, by the way, used against me and others, is also the funder and the creator of the Intercept. So when you sort of digest this diagram and you realize, okay, there's two people over here who are putting out the news of plagiarizing our material and just talking about one little piece, well, why'd you leave this out? Mm-hmm. And what you find out, Christy, is we put up here, and by the way, if you go to this website, you'll see that all of our findings have been up here for here's our lawsuit. Here's all the diagrams we found. Everything's been up here, all the playbooks. This has been up here for 2 years. So shame on you calling yourself an investigative journalist. You actually plagiarize this. Now, if you go through this, what you find is something even more profound. Is that, and by the way, this is right in the diagram, okay? The Center for Internet Security is the one that houses the clearinghouse so you could launder the censorship. The important point to understand is that I was speaking to a friend of mine. I said, wow, it seems like there's a recurrent process where you have the whole truth. Can you see this, Christy?
Yeah.
The entire truth. And what happens is they conceal it, then they plagiarize it, then they misattribute it. These two flunkies say, oh yeah, this other lawsuit had it. NBC revealed it. Then you prevaricate. If you read what they wrote, Christy, they say, oh, the only people got thrown off Twitter by this were people only had 56 followers. Bullshit. Then they hijack it. And then they put out a little piece of it. And then they have people amplify this truth, Glenn Greenwald, the ACLU, Tucker Carlson. So people are deceived into thinking, wow, we got the truth. Aren't these people great? So the same people concealed it. So I was thinking to myself, wow, this looks like they have this down to a science. Follow what I'm saying, Christy? Like this keeps happening. So what ends up happening is people don't know the whole truth. They only know a piece of it. And people are led to believe that we have a democratic process. So a friend of mine in one of my science calls, I have a company that we do a lot of research in science. And he said, Shiva, that is known as a limited hangout. It's an intelligence term. And I have it right up here. And this is what it says. This is out of David Brown, who articulates this. He's in the intelligence agency. He goes, there's a term in art and politics and among intelligence professionals that is known as a limited hangout. Whenever one's veil of secrecy is penetrated, spies or politicians can employ misdirection to distract the public. The technique involves disclosing a self-contained and sensational story to overshadow something more damaging. It's a non-confession with the agency or individual seeming to lay out all the cards on the table. And assuage, which means quiet people down, concerns that anyone is trying to hide anything. Upon learning the truth, quote unquote truth is presented, the public is mollified and moves on with no real scrutiny of note, missing the real story. And he says this term limited hangout came out when Nixon, who was doing all this during the Watergate scandal, Nixon said, let's do a limited hangout of the story, meaning let the story hang out. So they would acknowledge certain events like the burglary, manicure details, withhold others with the effect of clearing the president of any wrongdoing. So here's Pierre Omidyar, the founder of The Intercept. So you release a story and you amplify it to The Intercept's part of this. So the concealment is done by these people. So when you really sort of think about this in a much more deeper way, what you realize is, Christy, that the intelligence community and those in power are very clever. They have the not so obvious establishment. They know in a democracy like the US, people are going to put stuff together like we did. So when they get the big iceberg figured out, okay, we have this other engine over here. We'll put out a story, with the so-called pseudo anti-establishment people like Glenn Greenwald, like the Tucker Carlsons, put out a little piece. Everyone says, oh my God, DHS leaks. But the problem they have right now, Christy, is we actually put out the story. And if you go on Twitter, you'll see people attacking Carlson and Glenn. What are you talking about? Tom Fitton. This was out 2 years ago.
Tom Fitton said that?
No, Tom Fitton didn't. Others are going to, all these grifters on the internet will talk about it. And a lot of this on the grifter community has to do with so many people are about getting the views to their website. So you have that piece, but the fundamental great thing about this situation is we're able to talk about this. We're able to talk about this engineered process that exists in media. This is part of how in a very rapid 21st century news cycle, people are distracted. You distract the masses. You put out a little piece of the truth. People, oh yeah, they covered it. And then you outsource your media, gods to these people. Oh, wow, Glenn Greenwald will always tell us the truth. In fact, I would argue people like Glenn and others take stuff and they sit on them when it's convenient for him to put it out and get all the eyeballs to him. And that's what he did. The ACLU, by the way, they knew about our story. Our own attorney here said, the ACLU won't cover this because you're not a progressive, quote unquote, a progressive. The ACLU gets $1 million from Pierre Omidyar. And when the DHS leak story out, they tweeted that out. They amplified it.
Interesting. Well, I want to get into that real quick. So to review, investigative journalists are supposed to look at conflicts of interests and examine motivations. And in this case, the conflict of interest was ignored, being the fact that the Intercept founder was involved in this process that made it possible for there to be government.
Precisely for DHS to do the censorship, they needed Pierre Omidyar's assistant.
The founder of the Intercept,
Right.
who, for you guys, the Intercept is the one that supposedly exposed this collusion between big tech and DHS, just one small part of it. But the other part of this is motivations. And so I feel like we're getting to the motivations. What I'm missing in my puzzle piece right now is the timing. Why did they do this 2 years later? Why did they do this now?
Good question. Good question. Look, I can tell you that, people watch what we do. Okay. People watch our movement globally. On October 28th, if you watch the timing, and by the way, this thing had been sitting there. It's not like they suddenly did this story. Okay. There's no way. So October 28th, Elon Musk announces that, remember, I was deplatformed off Twitter, and it's the Twitter lawsuit of the century that took place. So when Elon Musk was on October 28th is when he bought Twitter, 28th, 29th. On 30th, we did a Facebook post, which started going viral. All of our followers were putting it out there. I said, Elon Musk, you must go review this website because the back end of Twitter has a direct portal, and it's up there. You can see it. We took a screenshot. The next day, 24 hours later, boom, DHS leaks comes out. Okay. So if you look at the timing of this was orchestrated, because the bottom line is this. When people look at what we discovered and the little little tip of the iceberg that they discovered, it's a absolute classic limited hangout, because you don't want the big story to come out like Watergate. You don't want everything to come out. You put out a little piece. So, and you amplify it by the same people who knew about our stuff. So the motivation here is concealment of the entire domestic infrastructure. And to me, Christy, this has been from the beginning. Before our lawsuit, when we discovered this infrastructure, we were deplatformed. That's what caused the deplatforming. During our lawsuit, the judge wanted to strike a deal with me just to put me back on Twitter and not have my other claims survive, to have the claims against the government. He wanted to suppress that. When I wouldn't agree to that, he became angry with me. And then he sealed our lawsuit. He wanted to seal that diagram. You see, it's all about concealing that diagram, that censorship network. And after he sealed my lawsuit,
because then we can see behind the curtain, right?
You can see that Harvard Belfer School's involved. You can see the UK government's involved. DHS is one little piece of it. You can see Pierre Omidyar is involved. You can see the Zuckerbergs are involved. You can see Fox News founders are involved. They are all one elitist, little incestuous set of people who believe the vast majority of human beings should be their slaves and vassals. And that's what this is about. So Pierre Omidyar is very clever. He starts the Intercept to serve as his damage control as he needs. I would probably argue we should probably go look at all the stories the Intercept has done. It's probably a little half-truth of the big story. So they act as though they're the investigative journalists doing democracy. In fact, Pierre Omidyar calls his nonprofit the Democracy Fund. You see, they use these anodyne terms. It's like O'Brien in Orwell's organization. It's the organization within the organization. So but once we understand this, Christy, we can start seeing who the real heroes are. In this FTX recent incident that took place, this little kid, complete fool who stole all this money and all the celebrities were behind. You know what he said in his recent interview? He said, to let everyone know, you got to, all these ethics that I claimed I had are not my ethics. I don't care about people, and all these celebrities, they just make up stuff, how much they care for people. And he fundamentally says that the real heroes, he goes, are suppressed and the fake heroes are put up. So he's sort of making these confessions, and that's what this is about. So what we believe, our movement for truth, freedom, and health is, anytime we see someone who claims they're anti-establishment out in the mainstream media, that is the establishment controlling the narrative. And this is the dynamics. It's physics. It's the engineering of controlling the populace. You don't want them to know the whole iceberg, because if they did, they would say and the reason credit matters, Christy, not only to the invention of email, but on this, it's not about ego, because people need to know who their real leaders are. There are leaders who come bottoms up, like myself. And people need to know that it is working people who have their leaders among them. They don't need to look to the Kennedys. They don't need to look to the Tucker Carlsons, with a little preppy boy who got everything he wanted and concealed the Hunter Biden story. Hunter Biden wrote a nice, recommendation letter for his own son. These people are one. They may act like they're this dialectic, but they're part of the whole clique. And they have
So
their
that goes back to, be careful about left versus right and Republican versus Democrat, because so often they're all one and the same. Someone did comment like, wow, this list is long. Is there anyone that Dr. Shiva trusts?
Yeah, let me tell you who I trust. I trust the guy who wrote that comment. What people need, that question is an interesting question. We also have a solution. So if email was a solution, what we've exposed, the censorship system in that diagram is a system. It's a system to launder censorship. The opposition to that is building a movement for truth, freedom, and health. So if people go to truthfreedomandhealth.com, we've also built a system. And that system begins with you. The brainwashing, look, there's more of us than them. So why is it this occurs? The establishment spends so much amount of media energy to making sure we outsource it to, this Hollywood celebrity is going to do it for us. Oh, Donald Trump is going to do it to us, or this person or that person or Bernie Sanders or Obama. This is a brainwashing. They don't want you to ask the question, what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. Because if they look at the arc of human history, they'll find out it is when bottoms-up movements took place, like in the United States in the 1800s, led by majority women. And then by the 1900s, those powerful militant movements, bottoms up, is how we got rid of child labor. It's how we got infrastructure. If you look at all the gains that were made in the early 1900s, it came from these powerful movements. And by the 1950s, the left and the right got together. They said all those bottoms-up movements, and anytime they said working people unite, were communists and they were Marxists. That's what the right wing did, the McCarthy era. And the left wing took over these bottoms-up movements, the trade unions. So by the 1970s, there were no more bottoms-up strikes. Between 1900 and 1970, we had close to 100,000 strikes, 100 million people striking. And that's when the GDP grew and everyone's freedoms grew. But starting in 1970, the unions were taken over by the left and Wall Street from the right. Anytime you said working people organized bottoms up, they called you Marxist, socialist. That was sort of buzzwords. And so between 1970 to today, there's been no bottoms up movements. And that is what they don't want. But what we've done at Truth, Freedom, and Health is we educate people on a systems understanding. Pierre Omidyar understands systems. Henry Kissinger understands systems. There is a science of systems. So what we've done is make that very complicated science very achievable that anyone can learn it. Then we've created tools where people can get on the ground and educate their neighbors. Activism on the ground. And then we've created tools where people can interconnect and commune together. So that's the bottom line, Christy, that the arc of human history has always occurred when individuals rose up.
Is this right, real quick? Truth, Freedom, Health?
Truth, Freedom, Health. And I'll share with you a quick screen.
Is that right? Truthfreedomhealth.com?
Yeah, let me just show you. There's some very nice diagrams also on that site, which really will inspire people so people don't feel, and let me share my screen here, Christy, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm, of course.
So let me go here. So if people go to truthfreedomhealth.com, you'll see, since you brought up email, it says a man who invented email now creates a system to make people street smart, beyond left and right, beyond pro and anti. So what we've created is a complete set of education, a community, and we have a whole set of technologies equivalent to Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube that people use to communicate. And we have over 350,000 people globally, 95 countries. And we have everyday people go through this process and they're becoming activists on the ground. And we have many, many victories. But the bottom line, the problem that we're solving, Christy, is the following. If you think about it, there's so much information out there. But it doesn't mean with all this information, people are getting healthier mentally or physically. We have 2.5 billion people are obese. We have more and more people are anxious and depressed. And people are completely confused. And the reason this is occurring is because the establishment, just like the limited hangout, if you think about it, is a way to disseminate ignorance. So you don't see the whole, you only see the tip of the iceberg. You know what I'm saying? So you don't get to interconnect everything. So people then get deluded or they get confused. And what this ultimately results, and this is what people in power want, they want people to be desperate. Oh, I'm going to take my gun and do something. They love that when people do that. They want people to be in the left or right camp divided, or they want people to say, I'm just going to go meditate and live in an ashram, right? They love any one of these. But that's what the ignorance reveals. And when you realize that the only way out of this is knowledge, But knowledge is different than information. Knowledge is understanding how to connect the dots. And that's called the science of systems. Pierre Omidyar, if you go to his website, he pushes system thinking. The elites do. And that leads you to wisdom and clarity. And clarity makes you now a person who can start recognizing the power is in your neighbors and organizing independently. But you have to have this knowledge of systems, which we talk about.
We did see some people using that system to change up school board
Exactly.
lineups, etc.
Exactly. But what we do is it's taken me sort of 30, 40 years to put together what I learned at MIT in a way that's accessible. So people actually learn what is a system, how the science is the foundations of everything. George Soros is a professor, is a theorist in this. But if we don't learn how to think, we're going to be told what to think. So science of systems. Then we give away people books and theory. And then we've also created a tool where people can apply the same science to their bodies, to understand how their body is a system. They also get tools where they also have a huge community. And then we get people on the ground. Okay. So what we've done, Christy, is to really, it's Truth, Freedom, and Health is a system of education. It's a system, it's a community, and it's technology. But if we had had this tool back in the 1920s, if we had had this tool during the anti-war movements, you say, things would have collapsed much faster. Meaning, so the elites always want people to outsource their activism to a politician, to a celebrity. They don't want people to look to their left and their
we've
right
definitely
either.
seen that. There's definitely been like savior type complexes when it comes to Donald Trump, savior type complexes when it comes to Elon Musk. Elon Musk is going to save free speech, and that has always made me feel uncomfortable. Although I sometimes wonder who the lesser of the evils is,
Well, let's talk about that. That lesser of evils thinking is what the establishment wants you to do. It's a way to think, Christy. And every 2 to 4 years, people are doing lesser of two evils. But if you look at major change that's ever occurred in history, it's been when working people organize bottoms up. And the last time that it occurred was the 1920s.
So let me ask you this. You ran for senator in Massachusetts. Is the reason that you didn't try again because you decided that you weren't going to be able to work in that system?
Well, let me tell you, I've been an activist since I was 17 years old. You'll see me burning the South African flag on the steps of MIT. You'll see me holding up US out of Iraq. We organize a food service worker. So I've always built in bottoms up movements. In 2016, I decided to run because I saw what was occurring was there was rumblings where people after Obama, right, were starting to become more anti-establishment. But we never had any illusions, Christy. Our running was to build a movement. So the last 3 years, what we've done is we've consolidated our movement for truth, freedom, and health. We have people, leaders all over the world who are learning this. And you don't have to be an MIT PhD. We have a hairdresser, an esthetician who teaches a course to PhDs. We've made it where it's learn, teach, and serve. Anyone can learn this. But if we don't learn this science, it's like they have a nuclear weapon, you have bows and arrows. It's the ability to think. So we've been effectively building this movement. We've been continuing to do the exposure of the establishment, breaking people's illusions. So people start looking, put the mirror up to themselves. And that's what needs to be done. So we may decide to run again, but if we run, Christy, it's not, the goal is the election should be backed by a movement. If it helps expand the movement, great. But if you're running to change the world, to win a political office, that's called opportunism. So by the time, Christy, people come to a point in their lives, they say, you know what? I don't want to be desperate. I want to change things. They come across two paths that the establishment wants you to do. File lawsuits, take the legalism approach, or the opportunism approach, which is electoral politics. There is a third approach, which is to build a bottoms-up movement. To the extent that these other two approaches are backed by a movement, fine. But the goal is, when you look at history, it has been people's movements, not the left wing, not the right wing, that have substantially changed things. It has never been politicians. It's never been celebrities. They come way after. They watch which way the wind blows. Then they jump in.
Now, I think it's hard not to lose heart. I mean, for me as a person of faith, I have to constantly remind myself of the Bible verse that talks about take heart, I have overcome the world, because it is very discouraging. I mean, you yourself were able to expose that they didn't follow the rules when it came to your election. And so whatever came of that, and what faith do you have that anything can be changed when no one's held accountable for not following the law or following the rules? I mean, I also want to, as an addendum to that, have you react to what we're seeing going on in Arizona. And any thoughts that you have on that. So sorry, I threw a lot at you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, look, Christ is one of my great heroes. Okay. People need to recognize that when you look at the life of Christ, there is a deeply spiritual aspect, and we can all talk about that. It's a much longer discussion, but you can look at the material things he did while he was here from the evidence that we have. His enemy ultimately wasn't the Romans. It was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You know, people forget that he went into the market and whipped not only once, but multiple whippings took place of these people. And most quote unquote Christians don't want to talk about that. Oh, that was Christ getting angry. But the fundamental issue was that Christ had realized it was these people talking about God who were many times the biggest evil. The leaders of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now, there's a big lesson to be taken away from that. And by the way, if you actually read closely a lot of the stuff, Christ was also educating lots and lots of people to understand these principles. So ultimately, it is movements. It is enlightenment, educating people. And what we need to, the big opportunity we have today is that the movement for truth, freedom, and health exists. We've put the science out. We put the education. We have a global community. People don't need to feel isolated like you're alone. You know, we just had a meeting this morning. Every Thursdays, we do what's called an open house. We have close to 100 people on there from all over the planet. And we'll do it again this evening. And I encourage people to come to those open houses because you'll see you're not alone. There are a lot of smart people. But the bottom line is, as people start to awaken, Christy, and they start breaking from the left and the right, they have the left wing elements and the right wing elements that sucker them back in. The people who seemingly say all the right things, but they don't want to build a movement. They're interested in you coming back to the wings of the establishment and saying, well, I guess I got to choose one of the lesser of two evils. Whenever you hear lesser of two evils, that shows these people are not about building a movement. Not to, attack what you said, but
no, it's fine. It's fine.
I mean,
it's hard to break free from that, because it's like, especially when you go to the ballot box, it's like that resisting that feeling of you're just throwing your vote away.
How did women get the right to vote, Christy? Let's go even back before that.
Whining? I don't know.
When Susan B. Anthony went into the Congress and she said women should have, she was actually fighting for universal suffrage for blacks, women, and everything. It's quite extraordinary. They laughed her out of the House of Representatives. What did she do? She went on the streets. She started collecting signatures. She built a movement. That is how women got the right to vote. Any gains that came out of, they talk about the vaccine,
So basically we got lazy.
Yeah, people are outsourcing their stuff because every day you're hit with the Kardashians, Robert F. Kennedy, a whole nother story. We can talk about him, right? Talks all this game about medical freedom, but at his own house, everyone's got to be vaccinated, right? You have these charlatans out there. They want you to outsource your stuff because the establishment knows they gave you the Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights means you exercise your freedom of speech, not hope Tucker Carlson covers this. And, Dr. Shiva didn't get covered on Tucker Carlson. We don't care. We're going to build our own movement. That's what people need to do. We can't be fat, dumb, and lazy. And that's what we're becoming. Because
but that's the American way. No, I'm kidding.
No, it wasn't the American way.
You're right.
It wasn't. May Day, International Workers' Day, was started in America on May 1st, 1886, to commemorate 4 American workers were hanged in America for fighting for the 8-hour workday in the Haymarket riots.
Wow.
And in commemoration of those 4 workers, every worker over the world commemorated that as May Day. And then we branded it as a communist holiday. Absolutely false. So all over the world, we celebrate International Workers' Day to commemorate those 4 workers who died fighting for the 8-hour workday in the United States. Reagan made it Law Day. Okay? So the brainwashing that has occurred to the American public is quite profound because Americans have the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. So in order to make sure that they never bottoms up exercise these, they pummel them to outsource your freedoms to these morons and imbeciles, the Kardashians, the Hollywood celebrities, the Donald Trumps. And this is why you're in the condition you're in, because the U.S. economy is people should go to other third world countries and see how people live. People have so much here, and people are not exercising the need to build these bottoms up movements. So I would say, yes, email was a great invention, but truth, freedom, and health, that system I would say is even a more profound invention, because it's going to educate people how to see the world as it truly is from a systems perspective, and how they can be part of a movement individually and collectively. That's how, in the old days, Christy, when someone got hurt in your local neighborhood, there was no welfare. There was a local church which would help people. They got them food. People worked together. And we've outsourced this community building to a bunch of morons, thinking, oh, Tucker Carlson covered this. Isn't it great? No, someone else covered it 2 years ago and we got it out. And so independent media is very important, and people starting to understand the science of systems and learning how to think.
Absolutely. Well, we have hit an hour, so I just want to remind you folks, if for some reason this disappears on the platform that you are watching it on, I always do an edited version, and I put that out on my platforms like Rumble. Please follow me on ChristyLeeTV.locals.com, ChristyLeeTV.locals.com. You can follow, subscribing, help support what I'm doing as an independent journalist, and also make sure that you get involved in this truth, health, freedom movement.
Truth, freedom, health.
Truth, freedom, health, excuse me. And with that, I want to just give you the final word, Dr. Shiva. Share this like crazy, and please follow the websites, folks, and go ahead.
Yeah, on Arizona, I didn't finish that up.
Many of you right.
I never believed, things like malfeasance took place in U.S. elections. I saw it occur in mine. That got me involved. I found a lot of different anomalies. In Arizona, I did some of the groundbreaking work on the signature analysis, which was the only thing that the Attorney General ever took up. And I know our work had a lot of impact because we found out that they weren't curing enough signatures. And I talked to the former head of the RNC in Arizona. He said, because of your work, they're actually curing all the signatures now. Before they would have let 200,000 through. So there were two types of election issues, Christy. Again, when we did our early work, which started going viral, Meadows and all these guys called me, Mark Meadows, Rona McDaniel, but they never really wanted to address the issue. Trump made $500 million using our material, talking about election fraud, but never really addressing the fundamental issues. And they're still not addressed.
Well, we saw that they weren't addressed. I mean, that's what's been frustrating, is that you have some conservative punditry being like, we have to fix this now. And I'm like, why would you think that we could fix it now if it wasn't fixed when it should have been fixed after 2020?
Exactly.
It's frustrating.
And the issue is, I know Carrie Lake, she reached out to me. She got all of our materials. This is before she decided to run. But what ended up happening is that there are real systems issues. And by the way, this is the same thing. We talked about the limited hangout. When real stuff comes out, the establishment puts cray-cray people out there. There are people talking about crazy stuff, and Mike Lindell was part of this, okay? Sorry to say. Mike Lindell and all of his grifters wanted to sell pillows, okay? They hid a lot of that noise that they put out there, hid the fundamental issues. So what ended up happening was election integrity became a right-wing issue. It should be an American issue.
Yeah.
So that's what ended up out of all of this. If you notice, what happened was there were people talking about bamboos in the ballots. I mean, they literally had people talking crazy stuff, Christy. So the election integrity stuff, after a while, became a joke. And the real fundamental issues like chain of custody, the deletion of ballot images, the foundations of signature verification, these are big, real meat and potato type things. They all got swept under the rug. No one talks about it. Everyone will say, oh, yeah, okay, we resolved it. Now the Republicans maybe are in power in the House. But fundamental issues have not been covered because there was a lot of people in the election integrity movement who made money off talking about crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we have to recognize that whenever a real...
Well, I mean, we saw that even with like medical autonomy issues, and I got to avoid the buzzwords, but you know what I'm talking about with the mandates and everything. There was a lot of crazy stuff mixed in with the very...
That's what I'm saying. So the disinformation is done by those in power. So the
Mhm.
real issue gets subsumed. And that's why people need to understand this systems understanding of how and once you understand it, you don't get upset. You say, oh, okay, that's what they're doing. Let's go to the real problem and the real solution. Okay. It's not some wacky stuff like some reptile on Mars using some beaming equipment and putting bamboo. I mean,
Now, don't get
crazy
me
stuff.
wrong, I'm a free speech absolutist. If people want to speculate on those things, fine. But the
That's
trouble
right.
is, it messed up the focus where it should have been. Go ahead.
Well, you have freedom, which is for open dialogue. So you can put all sorts of crazy ideas. We want that because we want crazy stuff. But then it has to go through the fire of science, which is you look at the evidence, you look at the scientific method, right? And then you find real stuff. So if you look at Trump, who I supported, gave money, put up a lot of lawn signs. So whenever we eventually had to expose Trump, because what Trump ultimately did was he did for big pharma what Obama did for big banks.
Mhm.
Pharmaceutical companies have been losing revenue like this. Look at Pfizer's revenue went from 65 billion down to 40 in 20.
Wow.
Pfizer's revenue in 2021 went to 80 billion thanks to vaccines, and now it's at 100 billion.
Insane.
So you have to look at the actual evidence. You can talk about, I don't know, I used to get, graphite in the vaccines and they're controlling it by 5G. I don't know. I haven't had time to do research, but I can tell you something. The big elephant in the room is pharmaceutical companies were tanking and the vaccines have helped save the money. Let's focus on the big elephants that you can build a movement around. And that's what occurs in a lot of these issues. So with Arizona, I know a number of people there. A number of people jumped on the election integrity bandwagon to get votes, but they didn't address the systemic issues. So now election integrity, I guarantee, will get swept under the rug and the big issues will not be addressed. And that's what the establishment wants. Whenever something starts coming to the surface, they have the cray-crays coming out. But that's why we need a movement. If a movement exists, that's really about recognizing freedom, doing science, truth, and getting to your health. That's what those words mean, Christy. When you have freedom, you can do the scientific method to get to truth. And when you have truth and freedom, you can improve your health. And if you have your health, you have the wherewithal to fight for freedom and to do real great science. But all those three things are being affected right now.
I think that the first thing, I mean, even when I hear things like this, like I want to be involved, I'm doing everything I can to fight, and I'm most of the time feel like I'm drowning because it's just so much to do. So for those that like have the desire but are concerned about how much time it's going to take them to get involved, what do you say to that?
2%. That's what we figured. We have our people do 20 minutes a day. So people have 20 minutes a day. I know to do all sorts of browsing on the internet, do a lot, share all sorts of idiotic cat videos. Okay. But 20 minutes a day. And we have people, first of all, you have to go through the program. You have to understand we call it a warrior scholar program. You have to understand the physics, just like you would have to go to an engineering school to learn how to build a plane. If you want to build a movement, there is a physics, and I've uncovered those principles. So that's profoundly important. And anyone can learn that. You don't have to be a genius, or you don't have to know math or physics. Number one. The other thing is you have to get on the ground. You have to meet your neighbors. So we have activities for people. We have new people coming. You can welcome them, talk to them. You can go and hand out a flyer. You can keep cards where you can educate people. You can write a news article. We're creating our own news platform on this so people can learn how to write, pieces, whatever it is in their neighborhood, something's going on. So we want to give people, and then the entire movement is volunteer based. So people who can program, who can do things, all contribute their time. So all these other nonprofits, I don't know what they're doing, raising millions and millions and millions of dollars, but it's not about money. It's about people being involved and looking to their own left and right, other human beings to build a movement. And we've created the theory for it, the science, we've created the tools for it, but it's great. So people should not feel depressed or desperate because you have an opportunity. We've created that infrastructure for you. We're more catalysts. We're not the messiahs, we're the catalysts. So we've created this catalytic infrastructure that people can use now that should have been done 50 years ago, Christy. That's why we're suffering. Because people lost around 1970, people started outsourcing everything to union bosses, to celebrities, to politicians, et cetera. That's why we're in the condition today. People need to put their mirror up to themselves, not to outsource their dignity to others.
Absolutely. Well, I know I'm going to be revisiting some topics with you soon. I know something else is coming out soon, so that'll be a little teaser that we're gonna reconvene because we have gone
Yeah,
over
we have
an
a
hour
big
now.
news. Yeah, even though what they did to our lawsuit and try to suffocate us, it's not over. Because of that architecture, what I showed up, I'm probably going to be doing a video about that later today, so
Okay.
everyone should keep an eye on it. But the government of the United States, the reason my parents left India and came here, Christy, when I was a kid, when I got off the plane, I remember my dad had come here the year before, and I said, "Why'd you come here?" Because it was a big thing leaving India, and he said one word: freedom. And that's it. And the United States has some very important Bill of Rights, and the government has no right to launder censorship and to suffocate political speech, particularly. And that's what they did in my case. The government censored a U.S. Senate political candidate in the middle of his campaign. And we're not going to let him get away with it. I don't care what a judge did, we're going to go back at him. So I'll let you know more about that. And everyone should recognize, without that basic freedom and the ability to exercise it, there is no America. Forget even elections. Go back to this fundamental principle that for big tech companies, what we discovered with government can outsource stuff. And it's not going to be one little DHS leak story and Glenn Greenwald and Tucker Carlson doing it and swiping it under the rug. We're not going to let them do that. That's a limited hangout. We're going to keep this in front of people every microsecond. So.
Yep. So it is up to us, and get involved. And say the name of the website again to find out more.
So truthfreedomhealth.com. And this is about you elevating yourself, you becoming your own guru. You're not outsourcing. That's number one.
You are the hero you're looking for. That's what I've said.
Exactly. And collectively, that's a system. So me, a whole bunch of people start getting together, and that you rise up, you start exercising, but there's a set of principles. That's what we teach. So you could be an activist for 20 years and be hitting your head against the wall. Or you could be an activist understanding theory. And that's when you become powerful. And the elites know systems theory. They study it. So it's time that we learn this weapon. And that's the gift that I'm offering people, because I was very fortunate to learn this knowledge. We've organized it that anyone can learn it. And it's very, very important. Otherwise, you literally, they have a nuclear weapon and you have bows and arrows. There's no way we can build a movement without this scientific understanding of systems.
Absolutely. Well, guys, to conclude, please make sure that you like, share, comment, try and beat the suppression. It's ridiculous. I have like nearly 100,000 here on the Facebook, and maybe a couple hundred every so often see anything. So try and beat the suppression, and share, like, and follow on the other platforms. Like I said, Rumble, Locals, the platforms that appreciate freedom of speech. And also make sure you follow up with Dr. Shiva and get involved in the movement. And with that, I'm going to close out. Dr. Shiva, if you want to stay on and chat for just a second, then do that. But I'm going to end this. So thank you for joining. And again, share, like, comment. Bye.